Hey everyone, welcome to Conceptualism. I have with me here a wonderful composer, Vincent Ho, who is doing all kinds of interesting, whimsical explorations into what music is or what music could be. I was just listening to his fantastical birds flying through outer space. So I think we have a match here for my whimsical artistry and questions. So hopefully this is just whimsical enough for you guys.
Well, you caught me at a good time because I just had my fourth and I'm on my fifth espresso.
Amazing.
So whimsical is going to be the theme of this interview. So let's just go and let's just run with it.
Right. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's our theme. That's theme and variations on whimsicalness.
I love it. Sounds like jazz, and I love jazz. Thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure, Vincent. So, I actually heard about you through Dinuk, who is a colleague of ours, and I know the work that you've done, through your relationship with him is also very, very interesting. Your Arctic Symphony is very beautiful, and I've been listening to your work, and I think a common thread that strikes me is that you're kind of on the bleeding edge, right? Like I would say that in a sense you're a new music composer. At least that's the feeling I get.
Oh yeah, I don't like to categorize myself. I'm just a composer, and whatever I write is dependent on how I feel on any given day. But yes, if I had to categorize myself, which everybody seems to categorize, certain composers, yeah, contemporary composer, new music composer, orchestral composer, or just composer. Yes. I always saw myself as just a creative spirit ever since I was a kid, and writing and just creating music has been the outlet of that creative spirit for myself, and one that I've embraced over the years. I mean, now that I'm turning 47, it's been quite the ride, and I've been having a lot of fun so far. So in a sense, yeah, if I had to categorize in the limitations of the English-speaking world, yes, new music composer, but creative person, I would say.
Exactly. I like that you eschew the dominant narrative of everything having to have a neat category. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think the ontological limits of language often force us to put things in boxes, and I've always found that quite difficult, both as a creative person and even as an intellectual. It's like, why should I limit myself by your understanding what you think I am?
That's exactly one of the challenges I've been facing ever since when I started my university years, gosh, like 20 odd years ago. There was this need to categorize, and I've never felt comfortable with that, because when one says that I'm a new music composer or an avant-garde composer, whatever composer, there's a lot of baggage that comes with those words, those historical meanings. Okay, yes. It's like when you say new music, 25 years ago, it came certain images or associations come to mind, and over the years that evolves. Now today, depending on which nation you live in, new music is starting to take on a different meaning, and so I understand the need of wanting to categorize for purposes of, I guess, pragmatism, or just for the ease of understanding for the general public, especially for categories when you're applying for grants or competitions and things like that. Yeah, and so they need to somehow categorize.
Are you a pianist or the guy that strokes the cactus?
I never heard that before. I like to see myself a jack of all trades.
But the funny thing, I told my mom recently, she was like, Afraz, aren't you afraid of being labeled a jack of all trades? I said, no, Mom, master of all trades, jack of none.
I love that. I like that. Okay. Jack, sorry, say that again.
Master of all trades, jack of none.
Okay, Jack.
Which is not me saying, I know that could come across as innuendo, but no, it's a play on the original statement.
I like that, and I'm going to use that. I'll give you credit for that. And over time, I mean, I do see myself as a pianist, because that was my first and actually main instrument, and the instrument that I used to channel my musical energy out of. But at that same time, I also studied trombone, violin, cello, and guitar during my youth. The piano stopped because once I got into university, it was the one instrument I wanted to focus all my creative energies into. In fact, I had dreams becoming the next Glenn Gould, like every young Canadian pianist. They want to, they have those models, and for me, it was Glenn Gould. I want to like live up to that. But during my university years, I quickly learned that hey, I had a knack for composing, and that's where all my scholarships were coming from.
Yeah.
And so that was the direction that my path took me. I mean, I still keep my piano chops up. In fact, more so than ever before, because I feel that, okay, this is just me, and I don't speak for all composers. Every composer is different, and that's the beauty of being a composer, is that everybody has different voice and a different journey. But for me, it's very important for me to be able to develop my own pianistic or gestural language. So I guess you could say that Vincent Ho performance practice. For example, every composer of the Western world, they have, in, let's say, piano, they have their language, their gestural language. For example, when you play Beethoven, it feels like Beethoven. When you play Scarlatti, it feels like Scarlatti, and Chopin and Ligeti, and so on and so forth. And so for the last 10 years,
when you try to play Art Tatum, you just pull out your hair.
Exactly. Because like Art Tatum is just his own voice. I mean, it's his own physical language. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, the jazz world is full of great pianists that created their own performance practices.
Yes.
Keith Jarrett is one of them.
Thelonious Monk, Keith Jarrett, exactly. Like how do you replicate that physicality? I mean, it's almost impossible. I mean, you can play what Thelonious Monk played, but you can't really play what Thelonious Monk played.
Right, you can, and that's what I was fascinated with. How do I create my own performance practice? And it was 10 years ago when I started to really get my chops up again and really focus on my ability to improvise. And just as I was improvising and building my chops up, I started to discover what my signature gestures are. And when I say signature gestures, I'm talking about those gestures where you don't even think about, like it just naturally happens. And so you don't think about. And so as I became more and more comfortable with improvising, I tried to isolate some of these gestures that I felt were truly my own and build from that. And for the last 10 years, I've been building on that as much as I can while developing my pianistic chops to the point where I feel that I've developed my own pianistic language. I mean, it's still an ongoing journey. I'm still like moving forward with it. But by doing that, anytime I play one of my own piano pieces, I know it's an extension of really who I am. Much like I said, signature gestures. When a person writes their signature, they don't think about it. It's just a gestural language. It's a visual representation in gestural.
You're right. It is a gestural language and a gestural form. In fact, if I was to put it very bluntly, humans. I mean, much of the way that we think is gestural. You know, when you talk about how we understand, I grasp the concept. Right. Right. So we think I mean, our bodies and the way look at our numerical system. We have 0 to 9, which is 10 digits. Why do we have a 10 digit system? Probably because we have 10 digits. Because if we had a 12-digit system, for example, it would be much easier to multiply and divide. It's just more elegant. But that's the thing with our entire language and everything about being human. It's actually very centered in an embodiment, right? Like we are, in a sense, informed by the way our body is in the world, in the space. So when you talk about your own gestural language, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, to the point where I recognize, for example, the way that I play certain passages. Actually, if I was to tell a student to play that way, that wouldn't make any sense because it's my body, it's my language. So I think even to try to standardize something like technique, there's some cases where it's useful, like, but most of the time I would say the great pianists transcend any kind of standardization, and the way that they play is entirely their own. You look at Horowitz. When Horowitz sits at the piano, I mean, the little finger is just kind of curled like that. It's like, that makes no sense, but it works for him.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. And I completely agree with you 100%. I mean, speaking of Danuk Wicharadne, we had these conversations before. I recall, I don't know if he still applies this principle, but he only plays his own music on piano. And I get that. Because that's who he is. It's like the missing link. You hear the music of Danuk and then you meet the person Danuk. But when you see him perform, that's the missing link happening in front of you, because that's who
Yeah.
he is in his element. And that's how I feel too. It's like a dancer. Actually,
Yes.
that's a great example. And I use dance because I used to be a dancer myself. And so this is why this is the whole concept of creating your own gestural language in musical form is important to me. Oh, in the dance world, of course, you have to learn the preliminaries, I mean, the steps and the basics. But you get to a certain point where you understand your body enough, where you can transcend that, where their natural language starts to emerge.
Yes.
And it's that natural language that one, for me, actually, I shouldn't say one, but for me, I need to be conscientious of, to listen to, or to be able to acknowledge, so that way I can nurture it, so it may continue to grow and become manifested in musical form. And so this is where, for me, developing my pianistic language comes hand in hand with my musical voice. Everything you hear in my pieces is ideas that was born out of me playing it. If I can't play an idea that I've written, then it's not me. I can't like, out of, like, I guess a certain sense of artistic ethics,
Right.
feel I can expect other players to play it if I can't play it myself. So
well, it's interesting that you say that, because, you know, I've always worked teleologically, meaning I always work backwards. You know, if I have something to say, then I'll figure out the technique that's required to say it. So, you know, it's funny that I work this way. I work backwards because, you know, when I first got introduced to the organ, you know, and to synthesizers and just keyboards in general, I realized that, you know, one day I want to build my own instrument. I call it the Infinite Sonic Possibility Interface, which is basically 5 manuals, 5 keyboards and a pedal board that's 360 degrees, and has basically, it's an electroacoustic instrument, contains all the sounds of all the world's musical traditions in audiophile quality samples within a series of supercomputers and quantum computers, which then gets triggered on a proprietary speaker system. And the reason I want that instrument is because you know, like, one of my issues is when I'm writing music for an orchestra, if the first violin is not capable of playing what I'm asking them to play, then I'm stuck. You know, it's like, I can't, that's a dead end.
right.
And if I'm expecting myself to play my own compositions on this instrument, on this interface, essentially, the only thing that limits me is my own technique and my own imagination. And so it's interesting that you bring up the artistic ethic there of, you know, if I expect someone to do it, I better be able to do it myself. So I've always taken that stance. It's like, you know, if I'm going to do this crazy thing and I'm going to ask you to do it, I better be able to show you. Otherwise, I'm not going to expect you to put in the work and the time and the effort to make this, you know, to make this work. I think that's, you know, it's like it's like a samurai general. You know, if that guy has no sword skills and doesn't have the ability to fight in a hand-to-hand combat, how can he lead an army? That makes no sense.
That's exactly it. And I think that's fantastic that when you know yourself that well, where you feel that the limits of, you acknowledge the limits that you're given, and it's your ideas are beyond what those limits are. You go and create something that will realize what you had envisioned. And
that's uniquely human, might I add, because that ability to use the prefrontal cortex in that way to abstractly imagine what it is you want and then manifest it into the reality, I mean, that's incredible when you think about it. That's godlike almost.
And I agree. I mean, a lot of composers have done that in the past, from Harry Parsh to even Scriabin. I mean, Scriabin, he felt that there wasn't enough, he had to create his own, not instruments, but I recall reading, he wrote the poem of ecstasy, and it was meant to be performed with visuals. And because there was certain limitations that did not create the right conditions for the audience to experience what he envisioned. And so he went and created this, I believe it was a coloristic lighting design. And now I've honestly, it was something that I studied back 20 years ago, but those are the kind of innovations that pushes the limits of our field, that allows others to experience what it is that the composer envisioned. And it's those little innovations that allow our art field to grow, to move forward.
And why shouldn't a composer view themselves as a choreographer, for example, or as an architect? I see myself as a sonic landscape architect. And why not?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. I mean, yeah.
Why not? Right? Like, I plant all the seeds, I watch them grow, I trim the hedges. I plant the flowers, I turn the fountains on and off. Like, it's a whole thing, you know. It's like,
well, no, I agree. I agree. I mean, music is a form of architecture in the form of time, sound and time.
Exactly.
I mean, architecture is set in one time. When you create it, it's experienced in one experience. Well, no, I shouldn't say one experience.
I should actually completely disagree with that for two reasons.
Okay, yeah.
I want you to go. I want one day when you're in Toronto, I want you to go to the Aga Khan Museum. Notice the interplay of light. That whole building is a giant sundial. It plays with the way light affects it.
You're right.
It's a moving building. It's a play. It's an interplay. Like the way the light goes in through the grill and hits the other wall. It's like it's constantly dancing.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I take it back. When I think architecture, I'm only thinking about the outer shell. And just as I said that, I realized, you know what? It's not just the outer shell. It's also the interior.
Because Fumihiko Maki.
Yeah.
Exactly. The way you interact with the building, because Fumihiko Maki designed that building for the user. He didn't look at it like, okay, let me make this really cool, fucking weird space saucer that landed from outer space. He said, who are the constituents? Who's going to use this building? Let me make it for them. And then
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
And then he did it. So when you go into that building, it's massive. It's like a monolithic gargantuan thing that smacks you in the face. But when you go into it, it's like so intimate. It's almost sensual in like a Zen way.
And that's how the experience of art in architecture is for many people who experience the architecture through the interior.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's ephemeral. Any great architect knows that it's not just the outer shell. I mean, the outer shell does play an important role, but at the same time, it's the experience for each person that walks through the building and how they experience with each corner, with each direction.
Listening to the sound of the fountain, smelling the flowers, watching the butterflies as they land, watching the geometry of the mosaic as it unfolds, in the tiles, for example.
I agree.
All that stuff is like it's a graphic score. I was recently in a panel discussion at the Aga Khan Museum that was hosted by Princeton, and I had a question that was asked about what's a score and how did the score affect you? And my answer was, you know what? Everything's a score, right? Like I'm not going to tell you that notes on a page is what a score is. I mean, for example, watching a cymatic installation where water reacts to the vibration of sound. I mean, to me, that's just as much a score as writing dots on a paper. I mean,
I agree.
And people are starting to recognize that, I think.
No, I agree. And this is where you opened up the door to a very important area that I'm very passionate about. And it's about the notation system. Now, people forget that the notation system is a Western European concept. Correct. And where was it born out of? It was born out of the tradition of vocal music, Gregorian chant. So you start with Gregorian chant with the original system, and then Guido came along and standardized it, but it was made originally for the purposes of vocal music. And then when it came to instruments, what were the first notated music? They were transcriptions of vocal music.
That's right.
Hence that began the tradition of the Western European performance practice, where everything was born out of the vocal tradition.
And do you know the irony of that? The irony of that is that Western classical music has sort of made a claim or staked a claim that they're the ones that basically invented harmony. I disagree with that. I believe that harmony was actually invented through the encounters along the Silk Road, through the Silk Route, and that in fact, harmony is a development of people trying to find ways to play together. That's my contention.
I see where you're coming from. There's a couple of ways to see it. Oh shoot, sorry. Let me just turn off my ringer. Sorry.
It's all right.
My apologies. All right, and let me take that a step further. With notated music, the Western tradition standardized. Well, I shouldn't say standardized. They're first to notate the principles of harmony, thanks to Perelton, Leonin, and the Notre Dame school, and that gave rise to counterpoint. And so we give credit to the Western tradition for that. But I agree with harmony. Harmony can be found in any culture. In fact, you go to any non-text-based culture, and you will find some form of harmony or heterophony of any sort. It's just that Western culture was
they codified it. They codified it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's interesting. No, go ahead.
Go on. Well, okay. And the reason why that's important is because the notation system, people still swear by it, but they forget that there were other notation systems that came along.
The Chinese numerical system.
Exactly. I mean, from my understanding and based on my experience and education of the Chinese performance practice, it was born out of okay. So we acknowledge that the Western music tradition was born out of vocal music because of the notation system. Now, with the Chinese, from my understanding, was born out of philosophy and calligraphy because it's very gestural. So it's calligraphy. So that's why their notation system was based on the finger with numerical, because it's about the fingers, where you place the fingers.
It's actually a form of tablature. Like guitarists would recognize it as a form of tablature.
Exactly, and it's a form of tablature, and it's not meant to be codified. It's meant to give the performers, I guess, a pathway into playing the pieces, but they were expected to take their own interpretations, take their own riffs on it, because they understand that every performer is different. And that was another thing I learned about the Chinese tradition, is that a lot of the instruments were reserved for the nobility or the aristocrats, and so they were the ones that played this music. Now, because of that, because of the hierarchical system, it was considered an insult if a composer put in too many details in the music. They only gave just enough to give the performer the direction of how the music is going to go, but the rest is open-ended for them to take liberties. If they were to be very specific, like say for the example of Brian Ferneyhough,
but you know what?
That extreme.
You read my mind. I was just going to bring up New Complexity and Ferneyhough and Nono and all these other composers. Luigi Nono. You know what's funny to me about all of that? Actually, a New Complexity score, in a sense, is just as open for reinterpretation. I can look at the score as a gestural and calligraphic piece, rather than simply as the exact way the composer intended. There's a composer called Mark Applebaum.
Yes, I know Mark.
Yeah, so he put up the score, throughout the museum as a kind of visual installation, and then on Fridays or in the afternoons they hired musicians to come and interpret those scores that went from being a purely visual installation into becoming an actual piece of music. So this actually tells me that this idea of the outline or of the text in general, a text can be anything. A text is a plethoric idea. I mean, a shard of poetry, written on a piece of clay, that's a text. A rock is a text. A weapon from an archaeological context is a text. The way, for example, Muslim artists wrote calligraphy on almost anything, on leaves, on shells, right? It's not just so when we think of a text, anything can be a text. Right now, this is an oratorio for two voices, and it's a text.
I love it because I totally feel the rhythm between you and I. And this, who cannot say that this is music right now, because we're feeling each other's rhythm, responding to each other's rhythms.
It's a jam session.
It's total jam session. Now, getting to the New Complexity, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's I only use that example, like the Ferneyhough example, just as a contrast to the principles that I've learned with the Chinese traditional music. And as mentioned, when a composer is overly detailed, it's sending the message to the aristocratic player that the composer doesn't trust their abilities enough to take liberties, and that's why it's considered an insult. Now, I actually respect the New Complexes, because cases like that represent a particular kind of process. It's a process of a very intellectual, very specific, almost micromanaging kind of form of creation, which I respect. And I've tried that myself. And I quickly learned that that's just, there's a place for it in my creative process when it's needed, but it's not the only way to create music. There are so many other ways of creating music, and that's just one extreme example. And Ferneyhough is one of the greatest examples of that complexity. And I'm sure there's many composers now in our generation that's taking it to further extremes. Now, that's the beauty of living in this globalized world now, is that before 25 years ago, the academic institution was the tradition of the Western European tradition. And so I recall going through the canon, where it was primarily the Western European composers, where we lionize the tradition of that without any, I guess, consideration of other traditions that we could explore as well, that are equally important and equally warrants artistic consideration.
Merit, they can be seen on the same stage. I mean,
exactly.
And it's funny because, there's not that many venues in the world that put for example, Persian music and African music on the same stage as Western classical music. You just don't see it.
Right.
It's seen as more of a novelty. But like, for example, because I work with the Aga Khan Music Award and the Aga Khan Music Program, I understand that one of the objectives is to actually see this music on the same stage as Western classical music and to give it the same respect, to give it the same stature, let's even say, as Western classical music, because someone that plays the for example the erhu may have spent their 10,000 hours and their 25 years mastering that instrument, and how is that any less than for example mastering the violin? It's not. It's the same. And people don't recognize that ethnic music, whatever you want to call that, is not on the side. It's part of the conversation. It's part of the world civilizational richness that we must acknowledge at the end of the day.
I completely agree.
And Western music and even Western thought owes so much to the Orient and to Islam, for example. Do you know that we wouldn't be able to have this conversation here today if it wasn't for the Muslim thinker and mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, who actually invented the algorithm and was the founding father of algebra? His name was Latinized algorithmi, which then became algorithm. So the thing that's making our computer run and the internet in general, I mean, that was pioneered by him. And so when we look at that exchange along the Silk Route, what we realize is that actually knowledge, specifically canonized knowledge, actually as a civilization, when we trace it, it came from the points in time where we fostered pluralism, whether that was in Al-Andalusia or Cairo during the Fatimid era, or in the case of Al-Khwarizmi, the Beit al-Hikmah, the house of knowledge and wisdom in Baghdad, in Iraq. So this history, this canon, when we trace it back, Western civilization wouldn't have happened without all the knowledge that came from China, from Sanskrit, from the Greek texts, and from the Muslims who actually put all of this together and sent it to Europe as Latin. The whole Renaissance wouldn't have happened without that whole golden age of Islam. So in music, I think, like you say, we lionize Western classical music, but we forget that actually there is a big debt that is owed to other world cultures who came in and actually invented many of the things that allowed, for example, a pipe organ to be voiced in a certain way.
In more or less what you're saying, we're leading into is the topic of cultural appropriation, where a lot of composers in the Western world has culturally appropriated many of these, discoveries. But this has a lot to do with cultural values. I mean, this is where we go into the area of the differences between individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures. Now, this is something that I've been researching for actually quite some time, ever since my graduate years 20 years ago, when I was trying to understand the distinctions between Eastern and Western creative processes. And I'm glad you brought these examples up, because this is one of the things that only now this new generation is starting to acknowledge and rectify in some way. The history of and this is, I know that we could probably talk about this for months and create a whole course on this, but in a nutshell, this big, okay? I mean, you have individualist cultures and collectivistic cultures. Now, what defines individualistic cultures is the principle of historicism, where one needs to have their own beliefs, their own ideas, and be able to defend it and stand out from everybody else.
They've staked their narrative claim, essentially.
Exactly, and that stake to ensure that they have a place in history. In a collectivistic cultures, it's not about having one's own opinion. It's about putting your own needs aside for the greater good of the community, and it's about the greater of putting your own identity second place. So whatever you do, whatever efforts you make, it's for the greater good of everybody else in the community that anybody benefits from. Now, how does this relate to artistic principles? Now, this is the interesting thing. With individualistic cultures, because it's about each individual having their own ideas, they speak in a language that's known as low context communication. Now, what is low context? Low context communication means that it's what I'm doing right now. I'm being very specific about everything I'm talking about. It's about making sure that I'm explaining myself to the T, so there is no question as to what I'm saying, and there's no context that there's any misunderstanding. A great example is a legal document. Anybody that reads a legal document, it is like to the T, very airtight, so there is no mistake as to what this document is saying. Now, in a collectivistic culture, it's the complete opposite. It's known as high context communication, meaning one doesn't have to be so specific. It's just a general implication, and they assume that the other person will get what
like a
they're
Sufi,
trying to say.
like a Sufi poem or a Zen Quan.
Exactly. And no, yeah, it's like, for actually, it's a great example. If I were to say, yo, beer, you already understand what I want, what I'm saying. Say, hey, it's time for beer. Let's go hang out, have a beer. Like, there's a pub right next door. That's all. We get it. Or it's just, yeah, totally understood. I don't need to go into further detail as to what I'm trying to say. Now, and not only that, with the collectivistic cultures, if they try to be that specific, it's actually considered an insult. because if it's like telling them that you don't, it's implying that they don't know anything. And that's why it's they're very cautious of not overstepping boundaries. It's for example, I mean, I've worked with musicians in Asia before, and one of the challenges I find is trying to get them, musicians I work with, to share their opinions. And they're very, it's not something that they're used to doing because of just cultural intricacies. And so they're not, they just want to, they don't want to, they may suggest something, they may imply something. For example, like if there was a passage that wasn't working, they would either say something like, this is tricky, and leave it at that. They're not gonna whereas if they're not gonna go any further than that, because they don't want to risk overstepping boundaries. Now, in the Western world, a lot of musicians have no problems telling the composer exactly what they think, because that's just the difference between
painfully so.
Yeah, painfully so. But actually, sometimes it's good, depending on the kind of composer that you are, the kind of collaborator you are. I generally like to work with people who are not afraid to share them thoughts. Well, as long as it's done respectfully, that is. I'm not afraid of people just share the thoughts, so that way we can start collaborating and really gel and really make some real magic together. Whereas if I'm working with somebody that's very closed off and is too afraid to say anything, it's really hard to get that collaborative spirit going. Anyways, but getting to my point, with cultural appropriation, because of the individualistic nature and also the rise of entrepreneurship, where everybody needs to stake their claim to get credit. It's all about getting credit. I mean, there's so many examples of this, and I'm sure you have a list of examples of the Western world where there's a long history of cultural appropriation to ensure one's legacy.
The whole British Museum, for example.
Oh yeah. Let's not go there.
The Elgin marbles, the Benin bronzes. No, I mean, most of the artifacts that are held in museums are stolen, and the result of colonial conquest. But this is interesting, but because when it comes to ideas and music, I mean, these are more abstract. It's more intangible. Like, what are you going to say to me if I play a melody that sounds similar to yours? Oh, you stole my melody. I'll be like, what do you mean I stole your melody? Well,
no, actually, that's a good point. Actually, I mean, what would you do actually as a composer if you hear someone playing a piece of music and it just sounds so similar to your, like, a piece that you wrote? I mean, but it was just happened by chance. I mean, what do you do? I mean, well, I mean, if I was like a entrepreneurial, like a hardcore individualist, I would sue the guy. But
if you're a bureaucrat with a stick up your
you're
ass,
a bureaucrat, right? Exactly. But if it just happens to be, but I'm not, because I know that a lot of melodies may share a lot of resemblances, and if they happen to have created spontaneously on, like, in different situations.
You know what's scary? Scary? When computers start doing that. I actually have AI softwares that I use in some of my aleatoric pieces. I found that some of the things that it produced were scarily similar to my improvisations. And I kind of asked myself, I said, well, how could this possibly have happened? I looked at it mathematically. I used a chess concept of retrograde analysis, and I went backwards and I thought about it. And I realized that actually the rules that I used in improvisation subconsciously, which I then consciously programmed to the computer, actually led to the pieces sounding similar.
Wow, that is really interesting. I would love to hear some of this more stuff, actually. I would love to hear that.
Totally. And I've also done AI generated poems, and it was the same thing. Like the way that the poems were generated were similar to the way that I deliver elocution, because the way that I programmed the artificial intelligence to do certain things and certain parameters, it just subconsciously mirrored the way I think and who I am. So
that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
And I could never have predicted that.
Wow, now this is really interesting. This only gives me some indication as to where the future of new music is going. If you already have AI replicating certain sounds, and it gives me I don't know, it's both a sense of wonder, but yet a little bit scary. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. No, honestly, because we just started this program off talking about how it's important for me to create my own gestural language.
Yes.
I mean, it's important because, like, for example, if you take any composer who has their own gestural language, you just know it's them. You just hear it. Okay. So, I mean, for example, Stravinsky's a good example. Any piece, you pick any piece, you just know it's him. And you even if you've never heard the piece itself, if you know Stravinsky's musical language,
you know the hallmarks. You know the hallmarks.
Yeah, you know the hallmark. You just know it's him. Same thing with Mozart. Even if it's a different melody that you've never heard before, there's something about his gestural language, the way he manipulates it, that's truly his. And that's, for me, that's what I aim to do for my music. I want to make sure that it's still an extension for me. Now, when you talk about AI, it would kind of freak me out if there's an AI that could replicate my signature gestures.
Oh, there already is. And actually,
that's freaky.
one experiment that I did was I ran the art of fugue through my software, through the AI generator, and I asked it to continue composing. And so what I did was I asked it to compose a trifold cadenza, and not only did it sound like Bach, it was like, it scared me to the point where I was like, if some guy played this for me and said this is Bach, I would totally believe them. I mean, I would trust them. I would be like, yeah, okay. But I know it's not. I know, because I'm the one. But it's like I'm gaslighting myself. I'm like, what did I just do?
All right. So this is where, okay, this is interesting then. Okay. So say we live in a world where, a composer comes along, creates their individual voice, let's just say. Sure. And then they have an individual sound, gestural language, harmonic language, rhythmic language, timbral language. And then there's AI that can recreate it to the T. All right. So then that's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but it's a little scary to know that we've reached the point where AI can now emulate, but at the same time,
but it doesn't just emulate, it can actually create it. I mean, it's a creative process. That's the scary thing. It's not just copying you. It's not just like doing what you would do. It's self-learning and growing through the process of trying to create in these parameters. So in a sense, it's a form of intelligence that we thought, was sort of, only a human trait. But obviously, with computing, it's now become possible for artificial intelligence to learn. It's called deep learning, actually. That's the process.
Well, in that case, then will there ever be a point
to simulate neural networks, basically?
Yeah, and I understand that's the aim for AI, and I have no doubt that we're going to get there within our lifetime. But at the same time, will we get to the point where AI can be conscious and have the consciousness, self-awareness, and the ability to create its own language, to create its own.
Facebook did some experiments, and the bots started making their own language. So yeah, I mean, they're not completely conscious in the way you and I understand consciousness, but they started speaking a language which the company didn't understand. So they shut the whole experiment down because they were worried.
Okay, that's freaking scary. That's like Terminator level scary here, right? All right, but no. But for me, for me as a performer, now I'm going to speak as a performer.
Yeah.
If I take a piece of music and I want to learn it, I want to learn it because there's something there that adds to my growth as a pianist or as a musician or as a composer
or even as a person.
As a person, yeah, absolutely, as a person. And so when I play something or I learn something from another composer, I'm not just learning like something like a good piece that they wrote, but I'm also getting understanding of their own history, their own emotional history, their own general history. For example, when I learn a piece by Valentin Silvestrov, one of my favorite Ukrainian composers, okay, and when I learn his music, I know that there's history that was there in every single piece he wrote. It took a lifetime for him to get to that point, to reach the individual voice that he's created for himself.
It was never about the product. It was about the process, because when you divorce the product from the process, it's cold. Actually, it's artificial.
Absolutely. And that's where for me, that's where the reward is as a performer and as a listener. But speaking purely as a performer, that is where the reward is to walk in his footsteps, to get some indication of what the life that he has lived through that music that he's sharing for the rest of the world. Now, if I were to take a piece that was created by AI, will I get that same experience?
Well, if you consider the precepts of vicarious empathy, then actually it may be possible. Do you know, I'll give you a thought experiment. There's been research done that shows that if you put a rubber hand next to someone's physical hand and you stroke, you know that. So basically what I'm saying is that what we empathize with is a matter of choice. So if you chose to empathize with AI, I believe you could actually have the same reward. And quite interestingly, when you use a machine to assist certain parts of your process, for example, I recently recorded something using a disc clavier, and and the whole point, it was based on an antiphoner, a collection of antiphones from the 16th century from Al Andalusia, and I was using the piano as a kind of antiphonal dialogue with myself. So in a sense, it was an intertextual reference to a text, but I was quoting myself.
Wow, that must have been a weird experience.
It was scary. It was scary because I was like, where do I start and where do I begin? In a sense, it's like touching infinity. Like when you hold down the notes on an organ, in theory, you can hold it forever. You're controlling the passage of time. So I think the way that we experience music and even the ephemeral is going to change drastically. I mean, I even said in an interview 5 years ago that I believe that the internet and the computer are the most profound tools of artistic creation and dissemination and innovation that have ever been created, and that I believe, art and music, the entire forum of art and music, is really headed completely and utterly in that direction. It's the same reason that when Newton articulated gravity, we could never go back. We can't unsee that. You know what I mean? We can't unsee that.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, and yes, I agree to some point. Where I disagree is that there are some universal themes and principles that I can't imagine ever changing. And what do I mean by that? For me, music is a physical act. When one creates music, you're creating it through physical means. It's much like dance.
But what about Brian Eno's generative compositions, for example? Those are
no. There's and there's a place for that. But I'm talking purely as a performer. So when I listen to music, I'm listening not only to the sounds or the music itself, but I'm listening to the performer, how they're interpreting the piece. It's much like how when I watch Shakespeare, I mean, any Shakespeare play or any play for that matter, I'm watching the performer, the actor, interpret those words. Every actor is going to have a different interpretation of those words.
But can I say this as an ineffable conceptualist? That's what I am. I created let's say a philosophical order, the order of ineffable conceptualism. Something I recognized, and I recognized this when I was reading Stephen Hawking's books and listening to his lectures. We're listening to his mind, and so in that sense, imagine someone that physically has no use of their body, but they're a musician in their mind, and they use their mind to actually, for example, play a piano. But the piano is not being played by them physically, but you're hearing them, you're hearing their mind, you're hearing what they could do if they had physical control of their body. So to me, actually, music can be loosely saying just a concept, and it could be. And so the act of embodying that concept is so fundamental to our being human. To see it otherwise is almost anathema. But I think going forward, going into the future, when humans are spending more and more time in virtual environments and doing things that are less embodied, then maybe even the composition of music, the performance of music, will become a non-physical act, even though it relies on the idea of gesture, which is inherently a physical act.
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure okay, yes, I agree that there may be a point where that's going to happen, but there's something about the live experience.
Yes.
When you see someone perform, and this is where we come to the area of human connection or expression. Yes. When you hear, like, for example, let's take Stephen Hawking. I mean, it's one thing when he creates ideas and it's recreated in generated in electronic form. Yes. But what about when you have someone narrate it, or like say he creates like a play, like, just for example, and it's, it's a profound expression.
I could totally have imagined in his lifetime that he could have created a theater of the absurd play, because he had a dry wit. He had that British sense of humor.
Oh, he's one of the most funniest guys. No, he does. I've seen some of his interviews.
That interview with John Oliver, when John Oliver is like, if there are infinite universes, is there any universe where I'm smarter than you? And Stephen Hawking just deadpan, no.
Right. I know what you're saying. But this comes back to what I said. If I can't play the music, I'm not going to write it down. So say a piece I created, but just through my mind, and through the beauty and the magnificence of technology, it was able to recreate it in notation form. But do I expect the performer to play it because it's not a true extension of my physicality? No, I don't, because I have to be able to physically play it for them to recreate it themselves.
But we admit there are people that have far better techniques. For example, I mean, I know that there are pianists who have far better techniques than myself, and so if I can imagine it and they can play it, then why not? So that's
okay. This is where the collaboration comes into play. Yeah. Yes. For example, I mean, there's no way I can play, say, the bassoon or trumpet as good as any virtuoso in the world. That's where, if I write something, it's going to be limited to my limited understanding of the instrument, and also through my own pianistic technique. And so when I work with them, this is where we discuss. Okay, this is what I've written. Okay, what are some things that you feel that can make it better? Where it can make it feel that much more, because like the physicality.
For example, if you're writing for a student of the trumpet, you would never write a piece that you'd write for a professional trumpet player who may also be a master of circular breathing. That would make no sense.
Absolutely, make no sense. I mean, here's a great example. I mean, like up until 2010, 2011. I mean, I was the product of a certain generation of the academic construct, where the lessons, or where I studied composition through just my lessons with my mentors, and I would get a performance,
including Christos Hatzis.
Yeah, Christos Hatzis was my mentor, an important mentor at that, who really forced me to well, I shouldn't say challenge myself, but just to be that much more critical about my process, because up to that point I wasn't being critical enough about my process. I just wrote something and I would put just enough effort just to get by. And so he really said, no, Vince, you can do better. All right, you're better than that. And so every week he would push me further and further until he felt, now you're making music. And I owe him a lot. Now, the reason why I cite 2011 is that was the first time I got a chance to work with percussionist Evelyn Glennie, now world's greatest percussionist. And so I wrote a percussion concerto for her. And up to that point, the whole idea of like collaboration was still new to me. And so up to that point, my knowledge of the percussion performance practice was limited to just what I learned in orchestration class and whatever I used in my orchestral pieces. But I didn't really dive like a lot into that world. And so I did what I could. The piece is called The Shaman, and it was written for her because
Shaman. Let's call the whole thing off.
Yeah, I love it. Because and I wrote that for her because being Scottish, I mean, first of all, she was deaf for many years, and so she experiences music differently. And anybody who's seen her perform knows that she is a musical shaman. And being that she's Scottish, the Scottish tradition is that their history, or their oral history, is tied to the other world, like the spiritual world. And so they still have the belief of the banshee, the sorcery, and of course the shaman. And so that's what inspired me. As with East Asian culture, there's still a lot of belief in shamanism. And so this is what gave rise to
and African culture.
and African, all indigenous cultures, I'd say. Now, when I wrote the piece, like I said, it was just ideas that I had in my head. I put it down and I gave it to her. So when we first started working together, then that's when the real collaboration began. She started to tell me, okay, you know what? I know what you're doing here, but this is what I'm going to do. This will make it better. Yeah. Or she'll say, you know what? This isn't really working. What about this? Or what about that?
She was a co-composer. She was a co-composer. And that's exactly. And that's right and think about this, like when the infinite sonic possibility interface exists, right, it'll be a composer's wet dream, pardon my language, you know, because you'll have access to all of these sounds. They're like so stunning, and like you can control every parameter of it, like even by using your breath. Like I could play a trumpet line, but like have the, for example, the growl that can be done on a saxophone, but using my breath. And if I want to work with voice, I have like basically the world's most sophisticated vocoder, you know, where my voice can be transcended into 1,000 different voices, voiced to different. But what happens is, if someone's writing for that instrument and they have no idea what it's capable of, then how can they write for it? How could I be a composer?
Well, that's exactly it.
And that's why she was the ideal co-composer, because she knew exactly what she could do, and she could tell you.
Yes, but the difference between what, like, say, the computer generated process and working with someone like Evelyn is that with her, it's not just writing something that would sound better or work better. It gives her, it's to make it better in a sense that she can communicate and connect with the audience as a performer, because that's something that was the missing link of my process, is that I didn't take in consideration of, okay, how can I make this better that she can connect better with the audience, to communicate with the audience. And that's key, because every time, it's like a jazz player. The best jazz players don't know what they're going to play on stage until they get on stage, feel the energy in the room, and respond to that. That is communication, and that's what she's all about, communicating to the audience, given at any given space, at any given time, that could be only created at that moment. Exactly. And that's what's important. And that's why I use the example of like a plays and an actor. It's not just like the playwright or the writer creating these ideas and then that's created perfectly as they conceived it. It's about making sure that there's the material that is created is substantial and gives enough for the performer to work with, to interpret it. And that is what is key. And that's where
depending on the skill of the playwright, or in this case, the composer, then some performers may have to work harder to bring the composition to life. Whereas if it's done in a certain way, like if you're a great playwright, you don't really have to, the actor doesn't have to fill in the gaps. The performer doesn't have to fill in the gaps. Whereas if it's less than excellent writing, then they have to work harder to bring it to.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the best playwrights and best writers knows when to just back off just enough to give the actors enough room to bring something to their interpretation. You take any great actor or actress, I mean, Meryl Streep, Robert De Niro, Sir Laurence Olivier, give them the same part. All three of them are going to take it differently, but that's the beauty of that experience.
Something like the Joker could never have been possible without method acting, and nobody could really recreate the Joker, because it's that unique person's experience combined with the character, and like it's this formula, if you will, you know.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the Joker, because Joker is one of those iconic characters of the Batman universe that every actor, especially nowadays, dreams of taking on, because they want to give their own interpretation. I mean, it's like what I mean. Back in the Shakespeare's time, it was Hamlet. Up until Laurence Olivier, it was Hamlet. Now it's the Joker, and there's a reason why, because it's just so ripe for interpretation.
Look at the people that worked on those films. Like Christopher Nolan is a genius, right?
Right.
And when you look at, for example, Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer as a pair, as a team, I mean you know, like there's a symbiosis there that. And so if you find a person like that will enable or allow for that symbiosis to take place, and even that osmosis, like I'm sure you're a far different person now than when you first worked with this incredible percussionist, because she influenced you in tangible ways that you just don't even are not even able to articulate. But because you've had that experience, you're bringing that to every moment as a composer.
Absolutely. And ever since I started working with her, and it started to change my perception of what the collaborative process is about, now it's a criteria for me to know who I'm working with. It's got to be someone that I know that I can trust, where we can feel vulnerable enough to trust each other to try things out and be able to like create that collaborative spirit to make something make the piece better than what I had already conceived. I mean, a great example that recently happened, and speaking of Joker, I wrote a set of piano etudes titled the Supervillain Etudes, 6 of them, inspired by the villains of the Batman universe. So I had Riddler, Two-Face, Penguin, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and of course Joker. Now the process was interesting. What I did was I created psychological profiles of each one, because there's a lot of rich material and understanding of why each villain is the way they are. Now keep in mind, each villain were in the story of Batman, they're put in Arkham Asylum, never in a prison. So that suggests that they each have neurological or mental illnesses or some
they're all neurodivergent, essentially.
Yeah, neurodivergent that's manifested in criminal form. So if you take Riddler, I mean, he's OCD, narcissist, he's on the spectrum of autism, and then you take into account of his childhood and such, and then you got Two-Face, who's like, well, definitely bipolar or PTSD, and very by the book, everything's left to chance of like on the coin and things like that. And so I created these psychological profiles. I gave them to 3 choreographers, and I asked them, okay, forget about the names, who they are. If you were to read their psychological profiles, how would you interpret their physical language? How would they walk? How would they talk? How would they? And I would film them, each of them, and we were talking about it. And they gave a lot of interesting interpretations. Taking that, I decided to try to recreate their physical language in pianistic form, hence etudes, to create pianistic techniques that will add to the development of the performance practice. And that's what manifested these 6 etudes. Now, the collaborative element was, with the dancers, but then I got to work with pianist Vicky Chow, who's a pianist of Bang on the Can, based in New York, a Canadian pianist, by the way. And she recorded the first 3 etudes, well, 3 of the etudes, 3 of the movements, the Catwoman, Two-Face, and Poison Ivy, just this past October. So I went to Brooklyn, went to her place just a day before the recording, and we went through it, and we were trying, I mean, she was trying all these things with these passages that I could never have dreamed of, because I sent her the psychological profiles, she read them, and so she learned them, and she tried things out. She's like, well, you know what, this passage, I think it needs a little bit of this, if you want to capture that, or a little bit of this. And so we were trying things out that there's no way I could have thought of on my own, because she's just a phenomenal pianist. And so we were going back and forth. And so finally, the next day when we were recording them, it was a true representation of our creative spirit. And that is what I feel is important to me as a composer. It's that growth, it's the process. It's the process of working with such a great artist and knowing that they have something to bring to the table that brings awareness to something about the piece that I did not see myself to make it better. Now, before, I know I'm going on and on about this, but the one
it's cool. This is cool. Like I love hearing the ekphrasis of your process. Like, it's so cool.
Oh, ekphrasis. I'm glad I met someone who actually understands that word, ekphrasis. I love you more and more. All right. Anyway, but I'm going to use, let's use the example of film. Okay. I try to model my principle of creative collaboration off of Martin Scorsese. Why Martin Scorsese? There's a reason why he's one of the world's greatest directors. It's because he's process oriented. He can bring together the best actors and actresses together. And when he films, he knows that he's got the best talents. So what does he do? He says, okay, sure, we got the script, but if you want to go off script, if you want to like have a moment and try something, go. I'll just keep the film going. All right. I'll just keep the film, like the camera rolling and see what happens. And we'll try things out. And that is how he was able to create some of the most iconic moments in film history. Then you take the and let me finish. And so that is what I want to do with my process. If I'm working with some of the best musicians, I want to give them some room to, bring something to the table, to bring something that it's their interpretation that would make it make the music better than what I could, because I can only create so far or conceive so much based on my own life experience. I want to know what they can bring to the table and see what they can do with the piece. Now, if you take the opposite approach, like say someone who's like total micromanaging and to the T and expects the actors, like still sticking with the film world, expect the actors to just do exactly what the script is doing, then sure, then that becomes just it could create a great movie, no doubt about that. But the director misses the opportunity to allow the actors to bring something to the table. And here's a great example: is the film Panic Room, by David Fincher. And I read he regrets his process in that film because he had Jodie Foster, he had Forrest Whitaker, Jared Leto, and a few others. I mean, we're talking caliber actors. But that movie, he was very specific about every detail. He expected the actor to do exactly what he wanted, no questions asked. And so he did create a fine film, but it was an essay in his own filmmaking. Years later, it was only later that he said, "Oh man, I regret not giving the actors a chance to bring something to the table, because imagine what it could have been with such an ensemble like that." And so sure, that's one process that as a composer that one can go about, like just expect the musicians to do exactly what the composer wants them to do, and that's fine. But for me now, I feel that I understand the importance for me as a composer. If I am to grow, if I am to continue my journey to become a better musician, I've got to listen to the musicians. Last example, say for example, you get Yo-Yo Ma asking you to write a piece. And say, okay, let's just say for me, okay, say he asked me to write a piece, and I'm like honored, I'm thrilled. So I write him a solo cello piece, and then we work together, and he says to me, I've got some ideas. I think this passage could be better, and I want to, you want to try, some of the ideas that I want to try. What do you think I'm going to do? Am I going to tell him, no, you're going to do exactly what I wrote and no questions asked? Hell no, that's very egotistical of me to do that, because this is one of the world's greatest cellists. This is an opportunity for me to learn from the best, for him to show me some insights about his performance practice as manifested through his playing of my music. So
and nobody likes a dictator.
Nobody likes a dictator.
And the key is the dick in the tater.
I love it. You should do stand up. You should do stand up. Honestly, actually, no. You make me think of how relationships.
Or I can just wear my monk's robes and spout out interesting quans like the observer observes the observer, who is whom.
Okay, yeah, and that's fine, but it only goes so far. Sometimes in collaborations, people want something. Okay, can you give me just some specific instructions or some direction here? Okay, I don't need a Zen moment here. There are some times where there is, okay, where you need that. But
so I should be a contextual monk. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
You can be whatever you want to be, as long as it makes you happy. And I will respect that. All right. But okay, this is okay. And you just reminded me of something.
Like if Yo-Yo Ma decides that he no longer wants to play the cello, he wants to only play the bow, then why not?
That would be interesting, actually. But yeah, if he wants to do that, maybe it's that he's going through a new creative phase, and let's see where it takes him.
Or maybe he may say, you know what? I no longer want to play the cello or the bow at all. I just want to sit down and rub two rocks together. I would still respect him. Because you know what? I don't respect him as a cellist. I respect him as a thinker, actually. So I think the medium is not as important as let's say the ability of the person to say something profound. Like if you gave me anything in the world, any set of tools, any set of instructions, and I could create magic with that, then I know that's a profound person. But if
Yes.
all you can do is work with what you know or what you think you know, that's the irony, because nobody really knows anything. Then why why are we alive? Just don't be alive anymore, you know?
Well, yeah, but there's a thing called ego.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm happy you brought that up. I'm happy you brought that up. But
Oh, I'm afraid I brought that up now.
no,
Okay, sorry.
I'm very happy that you brought that up, because I mean, being a musician, one of the things is we do have egos, like musicians, composers. Everybody has an ego, even if they have it well under check. I think they have it under check because they recognize it. They're able to, to keep it in check. Nobody
Right.
doesn't have an ego. In fact, being an artist is inherently an arrogant thing, because you're saying what I have to say is important, right?
Well,
And so
I don't know
and so
about
like
that.
so hear me out. Here my thought experiment. You don't have to agree, but basically what I'm saying is, for me to say I'm a musician and I want to be a musician, I mean, this is where the ineffable or the intangible comes into play. Like, am I talented as a musician? Do I have this gift or whatever? And if for example, someone could work for 30 years and accomplish nothing, whereas someone could work for 6 months and accomplish whatever. So
Right.
in that sense, there's a kind of unfairness, inherent unfairness in the way the human condition manifests, like, and wasn't it Einstein who said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you'd think it's stupid for the rest of your life.
Right.
So if we give people these different contexts, and the context doesn't fit for them, then as
Okay,
an artist, for me to say I am an artist, I think that's difficult. I became an artist, yes, but I'm not an artist. I wasn't born an artist. I cultivated. Like the wine didn't get made without cultivating the field. I had to cultivate the field. I had to, I had to sow the seeds, take care of the vine, pick the grapes. I had to, there's a whole process. I had to choose the cask, and
okay,
then
I'm glad. No, go on. Sorry.
so all I'm saying is that what makes someone great, I think that's a very difficult and interesting conversation.
Well, I try not to think about that. I mean, I try not to. I mean, because I try to be as process oriented as possible.
Yes.
If I'm goal oriented or product oriented, then that's where ego comes into mind, because then I'm just thinking about the product, just whatever it is I'm trying to create. Make it happen.
You're not having fun on the swing. You're trying to be the best person on the swing, which makes
that's exactly it. Exactly it. And then you're not having fun. You're just doing it for external or explicit, or sorry, external reasons. I mean, there's two different kinds of motivations. There's
intrinsic
one
and
that's
extrinsic motivation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So if you're doing it for like a goal, or to like for money, or for external factors, then that's extrinsic motivation. And when you have extrinsic motivation, you're only going to get one of two things: either you get it or you don't. Either way, it's going to be a frustrating process, and it's also ego oriented. Now, intrinsic motivation, you're doing it for yourself. You're motivated to doing it. You just want to do it because it's the act of doing it that's already the reward.
In a sense, it's out of love, and love is unconditional at its height.
That's exactly it. Here's two examples. All right. I mean, okay, here's one example. You get together with some friends, and it's just a spur of the moment, and you get together, you go to a pub or a coffee shop, you turn your cell phones off, you take your watches off, and you just riff. You're just enjoying each other's company, and you're finishing each other's sentences. You're all gelling. See, that's intrinsic, because there's no goal that you're trying to reach for this get together, and you don't know how long it's going to take. It doesn't matter, because you're enjoying the process, and that's beautiful, because you're just enjoying the moment. You're there. You're right there. Your mind. None of you, if everybody's into it, your mind isn't in the future or in the past. It's just right
in
there.
The moment. It's absolutely in the moment.
Exactly. Now, the other extreme end of the extreme of the example is, say you have an administrative meeting. Okay, so you have to set the time at 1 o'clock. We have 2 hours. We have to get this group together. You bring together the group. Everybody hands out. Okay, these are the points we need to get to. Okay, we need to discuss. And so when you go in, it's already being goal oriented. It's already okay. You have to
an agenda.
something. an agenda. And then when you're agenda driven, it's going to have an element of ego no matter what. Anybody that's been in an administrative meeting knows there's going to be an element of the ego. And that's why you always have, well, not always, but a lot of times you have that one or two alpha personalities who will try to eradicate everybody's opinion and force their own ideas through and make that happen, kind of a thing. It's like the art of war. But so that's where, ego comes to play. So
keep
when
your
you
friends
say,
close and your enemies closer.
well, fortunately, I don't have that many enemies, but otherwise, I would, it would cause some grief for myself and impact my creative processes. But my point is that when you talk about ego, I find in the professional world, sure, there's going to be an element of ego because there's a sense of pride of what you've done. But in the process, that's where I try to put my ego aside. I try to put my ego aside where I feel like I'm like being with friends. I'm in the moment. I'm in the moment, just creating something. My mind is in the past, or it's not in the future, or whatever. It's just in the moment.
You're being a child of the eternal moment, essentially.
Exactly. Another good example. Imagine when you're with your loved one. Someone like either, like I've got my 9-year-old daughter, a significant other, or your child, or someone who you truly love. When you're with them, okay, you're in that moment. You're in that moment of being there with them, sharing that moment. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what's going to happen. You just want to appreciate that moment when you're with that person. And so that's when you have those beautiful memories with that person. It's not you. Now imagine if you go on a date and already that other person says to you, okay, we're going to get married this day, we're going to have 2 kids, we're going to have this house, and you better have this car or this house and make this much money. Okay, chances are that's not going to be a very healthy moment, okay? Because that person is, or you, is going to be thinking already goal-orientedness, all right? And that is dangerous. That's just not going to open yourself up to having a very that connection that one wants to achieve. And that's where I feel that, okay, ego sure has a place to survive. I mean, everybody needs to have some element of ego in order to survive because it's a defense mechanism. But when it becomes to the creative process, that's where I feel, well,
in the creative process, it really doesn't have a place in a sense.
That's what I'm saying. It's just you trying where you should be vulnerable, where you should just let your guard down and allow yourself to feel vulnerable and let those vulnerabilities manifest itself and discover who you really are. And those are the moments where I have my most important breakthroughs, my own understandings of who I am. I mean, there are many times where I'm in the creative process where I take a risk. I try something different because I just feel that this feels right. I don't know why, but it's scary. Of course, it's scary. It's a creative process. I mean, it's that's the point of being creative. It's just try something that takes you out of your comfort zone.
And that requires you to feel safe. So we have this language of safe space, but like in the creative sense, like if you don't feel safe, you're not going to take those risks. If you're afraid,
absolutely,
if you're afraid your peers are going to take the piss out of you for trying something, you're not going to try it,
Right. And that's
and like if you're in a studio, like let's say your stable mates are not particularly easy people or nice people to get along with, and you're that's the cohort, then you're in trouble because that limits your ability to take risks and to grow as a person, because you're
absolutely
always.
I completely agree. And this is where I'm glad you brought up the safe space, because there's a principle or the CERTS rule that is used in relationships that still applies to creative process. It's CERTS, CERTS. First CERTS, C, it's consent. And in this case, artistic consent. Okay, so if you're working with somebody, you got to have artistic consent both ways. Or if you're creating something like composing, then you're giving yourself consent to be vulnerable. And then there's equality. Okay, if you're collaborating with somebody, you got to feel equal. So you got to leave out your titles. If you're music director of an orchestra, leave that out. Okay, you just have to be who you are. Leave any title that is a reminder of the hierarchy of the bureaucratic world. So there's equality. And when you're composing yourself, you're treating yourself as an equal. You are important to yourself. Treat yourself as an equal human being as you would treat anybody else. Then there's respect. Respect in the creative process. You got to respect yourself. You got to respect the process. Respect it. This is a sacred moment, like praying or meditating. It's sacred. Respect that. You only have a certain amount
take off your metaphorical shoes.
Exactly. I like that. I like that. And same thing with collaboration. Respect each other. You're both are unique together. And when you give respect, they give respect back. That's always the case. Then trust. Trust the process. That's where the vulnerability starts to come through. When in collaboration, when you've fulfilled the first three, then trust will naturally happen. So they will start to trust you. You trust them in the creative process. You start to trust the process itself, where you can take risks. And then comes S, the final stage, safety. If you have all four of those other levels met, then you yourself will feel safe to take those risks for yourself. You will feel safe to expose your vulnerabilities and manifest it in musical form, just as you collaborate with your musicians or composers, where you feel safe enough where you can trust them to be who you are, and them taking it seriously, and they will feel safe with you.
Creativity is a very intimate act. People don't always realize that.
Yeah, I agree. It's much like creating a baby. It is very much creating a baby because it's creative. It's creative. You're creating synergy. You're creating with the other people to create this quote unquote baby. And that baby, for me, in order for it to be a healthy baby, it needs to be the product of a healthy process, of a healthy synergy. I mean, it's like going on a date. If it's not healthy, then if you good luck trying to create a baby together. Okay, it's not going to be the product of something healthy. But if it's a beautiful synergy of like 2 or 3 or however many people, then the baby that's created is going to be the product, a beautiful product of that energy. I know it sounds right, but like trust
Vincent,
me.
are you advocating Roman orgies now? Like, is that
no.
Is that where we've devolved to?
No judgment there. If you're into orgies, whatever. Hey, no judgment. Okay. All I'm saying.
No, creative orgies.
Okay, we better like
no, don't make sure you don't get hearing aids.
No. I'm not advocating this or that. All I'm saying is I'm sharing how the creative process is analogous for me to creating a healthy baby, because the pieces that you create with a collaborator is going to be quote unquote your baby. And if the process is really healthy and it's then the product or the piece itself is going to be something that you're going to be proud of and you're going to look back upon, not just because you feel proud of the piece, but because of the journey that you took on with that other person or people to create that. I mean, I've had a lot of examples where I had wonderful collaborative experience. The process was beautiful, and maybe the piece, didn't turn out that great, but it didn't matter. Or the piece during the first performance wasn't that great, but it didn't matter because God, it was just such a beautiful process to get there. Now, then there's the other end of the extreme. Well, say the process was horrible, was absolutely horrible. We hate each other, but we needed to like create a piece together and perform it. And we performed it. The audience loved it. Great, yeah, whatever. But every time I hear that piece, it's going to be, oh man, that was a nightmare. That was a nightmare to create. I never want to go through that again.
You're definitely not having coffee or drinks with those people again.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, there was those moments when I realized, okay, we've been through that. Okay, now I know that I can't work with you. Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, we did our best. We just are just two different people, but it was something that was forced, and I don't like that. So.
And I'm so happy you brought this up, because that brings me to healthy boundaries, like setting healthy boundaries.
I agree. And this is where we talk about, I sort of mentioned it, artistic consent.
Yes.
And this is where that's, again, one of the important factors of why I love to collaborate, is because when I work with somebody, like, for example, Vicky Chow or Evelyn Glennie, we understand that there's artistic consent in play there. If there's something that they don't want to do, no problem. Okay, if you don't want to do it, okay, not a problem at all. That's where I know where the boundaries are. Or if I try something, and it goes both ways. If they say, well, what do you think of this?
Mm.
And I listen to what they're doing, I'm like, no, it's not working for me.
Both
Then they know
people,
my
both
boundaries.
both people need veto power essentially, because that's what I mean. If that was a very NATO term, but
Yeah.
but I think healthy boundaries also means that you have the capacity to even say, because sometimes it's difficult. Like imagine you're asked to collaborate with a teacher, your teacher or a former mentor or someone like Yo-Yo Ma. Like they're kind of the alpha in that relationship, whether they like it or not. Like there's that power dynamic, and so sometimes it's difficult for the person that's working with them to set boundaries. I've seen this in action, where the person's
Right.
and I think in the artistic world and just the world in general, I think one thing I've always, at least to me, as a thinker, as an artist, I've always said, you know what, if I don't feel that I can set a boundary with you, then I'm definitely not going to work with you. And just to protect yourself and to protect the other person, actually.
Yeah, and this is one of the things. I'm glad you brought this up now, man. We can go on forever on with our conversation, but the artistic boundaries that you speak of for a composer is actually rather difficult, most especially for an emerging composer. Now, when you're an emerging composer, I mean, you are struggling. You want to get as many opportunities as you can, and when you do get a great opportunity, you don't want to screw it up because this is the start of your career. I mean, and this is going to probably dictate how your path is going to grow. So, and unfortunately, a lot of established organizations or musicians know that, and they kind of take advantage of that. And that's difficult. That's why, I mean, for example, if I was a young composer and I was in, say, the New York Phil, or any, no, I shouldn't pick on, any organization, but to say an established artist commissions that young composer, there's already a difference in power dynamics. And because the composer is not in a position to be able to defend themselves. They're not in a position to be able to fight back. I mean, they could, but that could risk damaging their professional relations with that musician or organization. So I sympathize for emerging composers, because that's unfortunately the nature of the world of composers. I'm in a position now where I've been through all that, and over the years I've developed strong relationships with artists who I see as my family, because there is that respect factor, who I've nurtured because we've respected each other, we've worked well together. And so anytime I get a commission from an artist who I feel there's a power play, I'm not interested. The second I feel that there is not that mutual respect, then I back off. Now, the only time I would probably compromise on that is if the fee was high enough for me to swallow it. So if I'm working with, say, a dictator musician or an organization, and I know that they just want me to write whatever they want. But if the pay was like $1 million for everything, okay, this I can swallow. That I will solve. Okay, for $1 million, okay, I'll fulfill the agreement. Okay, that's the only compromise. But then I'll move on.
So then you're not in that case. You're more of a contractor. But you know what? It's very interesting that you say that, because I'm 23, just to give you an age reference, and so far in my creative life and just in life in general, I have never compromised with anyone.
Good for you.
Not my integrity. Not anything. I've never compromised. I say, look, either this is going to work the way I want it to work and I expect it to work, or I'm just not going to take the project. And I've actually turned people down, and said, look, you know what? I don't feel like I can do this. And so for me, if I'm working in a situation, it's funny you mentioned Glenn Gould as one of your heroes. I'm kind of like Glenn Gould, turning the air conditioner to a certain level and having my I'm an eccentric, and so people that work with me sort of contend with that, and they do it willingly. So there, in that sense, there's a form of consent, but I don't I don't impose those, like if someone comes to me and says, okay, here's a bunch of money, we want you to do X, I'll say no, thank you, because to me, if I'm putting do you know what I realized a long time ago? Your career is actually shaped just as much by the things you say no to as the things you say yes to.
And I agree with that. I completely agree with that. Now,
like a work of architecture is not just the form; it's also the negative space.
I agree. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, what you turn down also shapes the direction of
your
your
career.
musical voice, of your career, and
And it even
also
earns you respect, because if nobody can bully you, nobody can come to me and bully me into doing something, because I'll just say no, flat out no.
right. Well, it depends. I mean, it depends if you're not willing. I mean, okay, in a collaborative relationship, there's always going to be some compromise.
Yeah,
Okay,
but that's what I mean. That's what I mean, right? Like most musicians that are up and coming, right? And I'll use a jazz term here. A lot of them are sidemen. They do their side gigs. They do their sideman thing. They play on other people's records. But for me, I've only ever done collaborations or projects where it was in my name. So I love collaborating. To me, collaborating is not compromising. Collaborating is a form of osmosis. It's a form of symbiosis. So it's
okay.
not like,
So
yeah. So
okay,
it's
I
not
see what
like
you're saying.
we're like, if to me the word compromise it indicates that I have to give up something in order to achieve something else, whereas in a great collaboration, I'm not giving anything up. I'm only getting and only giving in this.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So no, okay, when you say you know don't compromise, but then I think about, well, let's take dating for example. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
in
yeah.
order for it to work,
You
or
have to give and
marriage,
take. Yeah, you have
yeah,
to
you
give and
gotta
take.
give and take to make it work. Okay, you gotta make compromise. And this is where I say
Yeah,
you're not gonna willing to
yeah.
compromise.
I
Good
mean,
luck with your marriage.
right, right. Yeah. Remind me never to get married. No, but the thing is, no. But the thing is, in all seriousness, I don't compromise my integrity. That's what I meant by compromise.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's different. Okay, yeah,
it's
and
a bit. Yeah,
there,
yeah.
and this is where I'm glad you brought this up. Another point you brought up is that the system that's at play right now, in terms of commissioning,
Nepotism.
kind of, well, there's that. We won't go into there. But the process of commissioning can, how do I put this? Is there's still a power dynamics that's in play. I mean, for example, you say you don't want to compromise, and I get that. And I've been through those situations where, say, I get a commission from an orchestra, and they say, okay, we want to commission you. It's got to be 15 minutes for orchestra, but it's got to be on this theme. It's got to have a solo for DJ. It's got to have film. Oh, it's got to be inspired by Vivaldi, and we need it to be programmed like well enough so it can fit in this program for Vivaldi and Mozart and yada yada. And it has to be something that we can do in like rehearsal in 1 rehearsal. Okay, so boom, 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 boom. You have all
So
this,
you become a caricature of yourself.
No, not just a caricature. Worse, I become a laborer. I become a laborer that they hired to fulfill their own vanity project. And this is where I say, okay, well, do I not have a say in this? Where's the artistic consent in this? All right. Then, okay, then that's not, that's where like you said, where they're expecting me to compromise for their vanity project. Now, the best way that I find for commissions to work is when an organization just reaches out to me and say, hey, we love your music. We know what you're all about. I think this would be a good fit. Let's discuss, let's brainstorm together and discuss ideas.
Yes.
We would love to hear what ideas you have, and maybe we can like find something that would work for both of us.
And you know what? Projects that are born out of that kind of relationship are so different than when they could just come to you and say, we want this.
Exactly. And I've had enough of those. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I understand. Okay. Being that I work with orchestras, I'm an artistic director of a chamber ensemble, Land's End Ensemble. I understand that in the administrative world, they may have a certain agenda. They may have a certain criteria. For example, I was commissioned to write a piece for the Toronto Symphony Orchestra for the Chinese New Year celebration in 2017. So I totally get what they're looking for. They wanted, because I've written for Chinese instruments before, and so they wanted Wumon.
Were you the token Chinese player? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I was just a good fit that happened to be Chinese. Because no. I did respect them going through due process. Gary Kalesha, who's their composer advisor, contacted me and said, hey, do you have experience writing for the pipa? I know you've got experience writing for orchestra. Well, have you done anything for narrator? Then you're a good fit. Yes. Yeah, then you're a good fit. And so it wasn't just because I was Asian, it was because of my experience.
No, of course. I mean,
it was and it was a bonus. And so that was where I understood that they had like an agenda and a criteria, and my experience and their agenda just mutually
it was overlapped. A good fit. It was a good fit.
Yeah, exactly. It was a good fit. And so there are times where their agenda, if they can't move on or budge on their criteria, then that's where they have to be, you know, well, they have to find a right composer that would happen to also overlap with what they are doing.
And that's fine, because when things align in certain situations, in certain contexts, it's perfectly fine, because you and you know what? It's funny you bring up Wu Man, because she's part of the Silk Road Ensemble. And you know what? The Silk Road Ensemble was actually patronized by Prince Amin. And Yo-Yo, Yo-Yo, I work for the Aga Khan Music Awards and Music Initiative. So I actually, I myself did not know this until relatively recently, that actually the reason the Silk Road Ensemble came into existence was because Prince Amin and His Highness the Aga Khan, through their friendship with Yo-Yo Ma, said, we'd like this kind of intercultural ensemble that explores all these different musical instruments, and so that's actually how that came into existence. And so that's amazing. I'm very proud, that they had the vision to see this, because when, obviously, as you know, Silk Road Ensemble is like a groundbreaking ensemble in so many ways. Like they've set so many precedents. I mean, I can almost, look, Dinuk composed a tabla concerto, right? I mean, in a sense, like, I think all this exploration into other musical traditions through Western classical music, in a sense, happened because of that precedent that was set by Yo-Yo Ma forming the Silk Road Ensemble. He was he was kind of a pioneer in the space, if you see what I'm trying to say.
He was a pioneer in bringing bridging all these musical traditions together.
And these I was just going to say, like, and even these ideas of who should work with whom, like, Bobby McFerrin and Yo-Yo Ma, like, together, that's like two children in a sandbox. Like, I can listen to them, I can listen to them improvising all day and not get tired, because they're they're like kids, it's like, it's just so entertaining in such a visceral way, because they're taking risks. They're like, or Chick Corea and Bobby McFerrin, for example, like when they do Spain together, it's like, that's not really Spain anymore. It's more like children, throwing snowballs, to use a Canadian reference, It's like, how could it not be fun?
Exactly. And that's where, when I see magic like that, that's where I see the CERTS rule happening in real time, where you got the consent, the equality, respect, trust, and safety happening once, and they're creating beautiful babies right there on stage right now. Anyways, we should wrap up. You've gone like quite a bit of time, like an hour and a half here. Easily we could go on for hours. But
I'll tell you, we should continue. We'll do a part 2. But I was going to tell you, the longest podcast I ever had on this episode, on this series, was 3 hours and I think 25 minutes with the conceptual artist, photographer, and professor of SFU. But I'll tell you, conceptualism doesn't really have a time limit. Now, I have some decent stamina, so one of these days I'm going to see if I can hit a 24-hour conversation.
Oh man!
But that would be,
sit on a toilet while you're doing that, or
do you know what? I think toilet breaks are necessary, but basically the only thing is, like, while I go to the toilet, the other person would have to continue speaking. So there would have to be a continuity. Right.
There will have to be that continuity. But personally, I would like to have these like part 1s, part 2s. Okay.
I know.
Today we had a great part 1.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
I love it. I hope we can do it again. Maybe maybe a year from now, when we're different, we can look back and say, remember when you said this? What do you think now? Okay.
We're forming our own tradition. I like it.
I love it. I like it. And this is where I say, thank you for this CERTS moment. I feel like we created some beautiful moments together. I hope we do it again. All right.
My pleasure. Take care.
You take care, my man.
Bye.
Bye.